Oh. Hariom, and greetings from Niagara Falls. To be a Yuvakendra, a young adult who's focusing on Chinmaya, or awareness, this tends to be in a controlled environment. You're in high school or college. There's more external structure. To be a Setukari, an evolving adult that's focusing on Chinmaya, awareness, this tends to be in an uncontrolled environment. You have to create your own structure with your profession, your relationships. Just visualize building a home in a neighborhood versus building a bridge on land or over the water. This is the reason why we have developed this Setukari culture, this Setukari community to support each other. One of the ways that we're nurturing this support is our wellness mentorship program. Our youth and young adults have a lot of power and little direction. Power without direction becomes dangerous for oneself and others. Our evolving adults have an equal amount of power and a little bit more direction. And this is why we're bringing together our youth, our young adults, and our evolving adults together to focus on direction, to focus on being a mentor, being a mentee. And this has been a great success in such a short period of time. Going into today, our first professional workshop, we have 63 pairs of mentors and mentees in this program. That's more than 125 seekers. Our evolving adults were instrumental in us raising more than $76,000 yesterday for the Chinmaya Vishwa Vidyapeeth. Our aspiration was 25,000. We raised 76,000, more than that. Within this program, we have an advisory committee made of those in the medical field, the education field, and they are facilitating workshops in a professional way to help our youth, young adults, evolving adults. Our first workshop is one that focuses on a universal and harmful experience that we're all going through, which is loneliness. We've become isolated. Our 2019 Setukari retreat was in person in Raleigh. Our 2021 was virtual, organized by Boston. Isolation, loneliness. Swami Chinmayananda has taught us we have to learn to be happy alone, but how? Our presenter, his name is Madhav Khurana, and he has specifically asked me to introduce him as the Puttar da Pind. which in English means a child of the land. With this introduction to Chinmaya Setukari, our wellness program, and our workshop on loneliness, Madhav will continue. Hari Om.
Hari Om, everyone. I'm just going to pull up my slideshow real quick. Okay. Can we all see this? Okay. So thank you, Vivekji, for the introduction. Truly grateful and thankful for the opportunity to speak on this topic, to have the trust of Vivekji and the entire CSK team to lead this discussion for you today, with you today. So I'll do a brief introduction about who I am. My name is Madhav. I am a registered social worker. I work, as my regular job, I work for a not-for-profit agency called the Canadian Mental Health Association. And there I'm a youth counselor. And then on the side, I do some private counseling with adults of all ages. It's a little bit about me. I've worked in a number of I've primarily only worked in the field of mental health, but I've worked in a number of different areas, from crisis work to long-term counseling work, to program development, etc. So the subject of loneliness was something that I've come across many times, and is something I discuss quite often. But honestly, it's a subject that is that there's very little research on. It's something that's relatively new. So a lot of what I'm going to present to you today is stuff that I've recently done some research on. So I'm really looking forward to presenting it to you. I'm going to start by giving everyone some scenarios, some case scenarios. There's going to be 6 individuals I'm going to introduce you to. And I want you to keep in mind the question, who of these individuals do you think is lonely? And who of these individuals do you think is the most lonely? Okay. Our first individual is Siddharth. Siddharth is popular. He has 5,000 Instagram followers. Everyone at school knows him and likes him. He is the captain of his school soccer team, and even all his teachers think he is great. He never sits alone at lunch. People always want to sit with him. On weekends, he is never bored. He is invited to many parties and online hangouts. Siddharth is popular. That is our first scenario. Our second scenario, Sri Lakshmi is successful. Sri Lakshmi is the head surgeon in the largest hospital in Brooklyn, New York. She has a team of staff who admire her, and she has daily meetings with a group of other health practitioners daily. She's always around people. She is often asked to be interviewed on CNN because of the prestige of her position. There's been word recently that she's being considered for the Surgeon General position of the United States. Scenario 3. Sangeeta fits in. Sangeeta is into classical dancing, reading, and spending time in nature. She has a small group of close friends, but she wants to fit in with the cool crowd. She musters up the strength to strike up a conversation with one of the individuals that she likes. And this leads to her being invited out to parties. Soon enough, she's invited out to many parties. She has learned to fit in. Sangeeta fits in. Sagar is different. Sagar wants badly to be a historian or history teacher. He belongs to a family where everyone works in healthcare as physicians, pharmacists, or nurses. His family discourages his pursuit of history. They think it's a dead-end job, and they think it's not going to support his future. They encourage him to pursue medical sciences. He decides to do this, and he plans on applying to pharmacy school after he graduates. Scenario 3. Shivam is alone. Shivam spends a great deal of time alone. He lives alone. In the morning, he wakes up and he goes to the local Starbucks alone and gets a coffee and likes to sit alone while drinking it. He often goes out for dinner alone, watches movies alone, and he goes on hikes alone. He notices that a lot of the people around him comment on how much time he spends alone. Shafali talks with God. Shafali spends a lot of time thinking of God. She does puja every morning and goes to the mandir daily. The Panditji sometimes notices her talking to the image of Lord Krishna while she's at the mandir. She doesn't speak to many people, and many people think that she's weird. Okay, so we have 6 scenarios for you. The first is Siddharth is popular. Second is Sri Lakshmi is successful. Sangeeta fits in. Sagar's different. Shivam is alone. And Shafali talks with God. I'm going to ask Nina now to post a poll. And I want everybody to vote on who they think of this group is the most lonely. Okay, we're going to end the polling in 5 seconds. Oh, we're done. Okay. So everyone can see those results. Okay. We're going to get back to this a little bit later. First, I want to talk to you all quickly about what are some of the impacts of loneliness. Okay. So in interviews, when people are asked what it feels like to be lonely, what we often hear is, I feel out of tune. I feel invisible. I feel disconnected. I feel left out. I feel afraid, confused, unliked, and unlovable. Like I'm carrying the weight on my shoulders. Or like if I disappear today, no one would even notice. These are common things that we hear or we read in interviews when we ask people about their experiences with loneliness. Loneliness is powerful. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness can increase our chance of premature death by 26%. Scientists equate that to the similar findings that they find with people who smoke 15 cigarettes a day. You have a 32% chance of increased chance of having a stroke if you're experiencing chronic loneliness. You may experience immune system dysfunction, increased chances of dementia as you get older, impaired judgment, increased chances of obesity, and lastly, but very importantly, are symptoms of depressed and anxious mood. Most importantly is to recognize that loneliness is a signal. What happens is when an individual feels lonely is that your body triggers itself into your fight, flight, or freeze response, which is the same response that gets triggered when you are in actual danger. Your body starts to release cortisol, which is a stress hormone. You start to experience things like interrupted sleep. The most important thing to take away from this is that loneliness is a personal signal that you're lacking the connection you need. Loneliness is not an indication that there's something wrong with you. Loneliness, by definition, is just a signal, a response by your body that you're lacking some form of connection. So what really matters? What does the research show us that helps us to combat loneliness? So now we'll go back to the scenarios a little bit. The first thing, when we talked about Siddharth is popular, the first piece of research that we that we find when it comes to loneliness is that quality of your relationships matters much more than quantity of your relationships. So just because an individual may have a great degree of popularity, a great degree of friends, a number of Instagram followers, does not necessarily mean that they're immune from loneliness. If they don't have quality relationships, then it's very possible that they will experience loneliness. And the analogy that I like to use to describe this is if I tell you that there is water underground and I want you to build a well to find that water. If you decide to build 100 1-foot holes in the ground in search of the water, you are much less likely to find the water than if you build one 100-foot hole under the water. You dig 100 feet down into the ground. So it's actually having just 1, 2, 3 very close, high quality friends is better than having, let's say, 100 to 200 friends who you don't have a very close relationship with. So the focus on quality over quantity is important. Relationships over success. So the next scenario was Sri Lakshmi is successful. Some of you may know this individual. His name is Vivek Murthy. He was the 19th Surgeon General of the United States. And he's actually one of the lead researchers in loneliness in the United States. Much of the research that I got for this presentation comes from him. He talked about how when he was Surgeon General of the United States was a time when he felt the most lonely in his life. He talked about how he was so focused and had so little time to build his relationships with people and to connect deeply with people that he felt lonely almost all the time. In fact, after he left his position as Surgeon General, he said it was one of the most difficult times he's ever faced in his life because of the severe feeling of disconnection that he had. So relationships are important. When we get caught up in the world of success, sometimes our relationships can take a secondary position, but that can often lead to us feeling lonely. Thirdly, we had Sangeeta fits in. Fitting in is not the same as belonging. I'm going to introduce you to someone else who's going to explain this to me a little bit better than I am. This individual her name is Brené Brown. She is probably the most famous social worker that there is. She is the head of the social work department at the University of Houston. She says that belonging is the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. Because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and by seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes for true belonging, but often barriers to it. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. So fitting in is not the same as belonging. If we try to fit in and we sacrifice who we are and what's important to us, then we won't necessarily feel a sense of belonging that we're searching for. It can actually be detrimental to it. And we'll come back to this a little later as well. Family acceptance matters. The next one was Sagar is different. Okay, so the reason I have this picture here of Three Idiots is that it very much parallels a scenario from this movie, if some of you have seen it. This individual here, his name was Farhan. He entered an engineering program and he really wanted to be a wildlife documentarian or photographer. And his family wasn't accepting of that initially. And this is something that we find in the research as well, is that individuals who feel that their family doesn't accept who exactly they are or what they want to do with their life do feel a great sense of loneliness. So although it's not necessarily the end all or be all, If we can learn to, as parents, to accept our children for exactly who they are, what they want to be, it can go a long way to improving how they feel and whether they feel lonely or not. So family acceptance matters. The next one was, I believe it was Shivam is alone. No, yes, I believe it's Shivam is alone. Alone does not mean lonely. If we have a great deal of self-acceptance and comfort, and feel a great deal of belonging to ourself, then that then we can be alone without feeling lonely. However, if we're spending time alone, and we desire to spend time with other people, we desire to be with other people, then that can bring on a sense of loneliness. But the main factor here is that our level of self-acceptance is what's going to protect us from feeling lonely. Some of us may be prone to spend time alone and we actually like it. One of the things we'll face when this happens is we might face some stigma from the people around us who might comment on how much time we like spending alone. Why aren't they married? Why aren't they spending more time with other people? That's something that can certainly make a person feel lonely. But if we can practice self-acceptance, that can protect us if we do like spending time alone. So alone does not need to mean lonely. Lastly, we had Shafali loves God or talks with God. In this image here, I think some of you may recognize this, but this is Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa talking with Mother Kali. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is a famous saint who is the guru of Swami Vivekananda. He had a deep relationship with Mother Kali, where he would often be seen talking with her, having conversations with her, seeing her as his actual mother. He would say sometimes when people asked him, "Do you see God?" He says, "I see her more clearly than I see you." I want to read a quote from him that can drive home this point. He says that pray to the Divine Mother with a longing heart. Her vision dries up all cravings for the world and completely destroys all attachment. It happens instantly if you think of her as your own mother. She is by no means a godmother. She is your own mother. With a yearning heart, persist in your demands on her. Interestingly, the research does show that people who have a strong relationship with God and a strong relationship with their faith are much less likely to feel lonely. So, and in our path, bhakti, having that relationship with God can really be a true, protector for our loneliness and can make us feel a great deal of connection. The main thing I learned in the research that I did on this is that the battle against loneliness is the battle for self-belonging and self-acceptance. Relationships with people is important, but our relationship with ourself is by far more important than our relationship with people. In fact, a lot of the times when we have good relationships with people, it's because we feel like we can be ourselves around those people, or those people accept us for exactly who we are, and it makes us feel a great deal of self-acceptance. So it's just a mirror for our own self-acceptance. But the focus to battle loneliness is the battle for self-belonging or self-acceptance. I'm going to go back to the end of the quote, of the Brené Brown quote that I showed you all earlier, where she says that true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. I'll introduce to you all this this continuum. It's something that I kind of put together that I feel like will help drive home the point that we have here. On the far left of the spectrum is high loneliness. On the far right of the spectrum is high belonging. As human beings, we are relational animals. We have to have relationships with anything. We have relationships with our computers, with our phones, with our cars, with the people around us, with our job, with our community. Everything that we have everything that we interact with, we have a relationship with. It's not just people. So if, for instance, you invest a lot of attention into your relationships with objects, possessions, your cars, your computers, your phones, etc., and that is your primary relationship, then you may be at risk of experiencing a high degree of loneliness. Similarly, wealth. If your primary relationship is on acquiring, gaining, sustaining your wealth, then you may feel a great deal of loneliness as well. Status or position. If you're going back to the example that I talked earlier about Vivek Murthy and him being the Surgeon General, he held one of the highest statuses in the entire nation, and still he felt lonely. So pursuing grades, pursuing position, pursuing status in our companies or wherever we work or in our schools, it can be important, but if we focus on that as our primary relationship, then it can lead to higher loneliness. Now we get into the other side of the spectrum. So if we can have a relationship with something like nature, and I also have written here the low mutuality and high mutuality. Essentially, that just means that you can't have a mutual relationship with objects. It's a one-way relationship. Same with wealth, same with status or position. Something like nature, it can give back to you. You can have a reciprocal relationship with it. So if you have a relationship with nature, it can really help you feel a little bit less lonely. Some people have a strong relationship with their pets. More importantly is our relationship with people. Do you have deep, high quality relationships with people? That's extremely important. Community is important. The community that we have here at Chinmaya Mission, this community of mentors and mentees, is also a community. Our school is a community. Our workplace can be a community. Our community itself can be a community. I know that everything that's going on in Houston right now, and seeing everybody donate and come together as a community, can make people feel less lonely and can make people feel more connected. It's extremely important. Then our self. What's our relationship with ourself? Are you investing in your relationship with yourself? Are you trying to have a positive, strong relationship with yourself? And then lastly, God. God and self are very well connected, but if we have that strong relationship with God, I really believe that it can really help us combat any feelings that we have with loneliness. So how do we combat loneliness? How do we combat this feeling of not belonging? I'm going to go back to a Brené Brown quote. Stop walking through the world looking for confirmation that you don't belong. If you look for it, you will find it. Stop scouring people's faces for evidence that you're not good enough. You will always find it because you've made that your goal. No one belongs here more than you. So make it your daily intention to stop looking for signs that you don't belong. You likely do this without realizing it. You do this when you compare yourself to others. You do this when you compare yourself at your job, when you compare yourself to what you thought you would be and where you're not. So stop looking for evidence that you don't belong. Show up in the world as you. Know your inherent value. I want to quickly tell a story here, but actually I'll come back to that if I have some time. Just realizing we're running a little short in time. It's really important when it comes to building relationships to be vulnerable, to share your emotions, fears, dreams, and beliefs with people, to show up exactly as you are, not try to hide who you are, not try to show up as you think other people will accept you, but show up exactly as you are. I think a lot of us do this, especially we see it with our social media, is that we try to present to the world an image of ourselves that we think other people will like and admire and accept. It's important that we learn to be vulnerable and show up exactly as we are. A lot of people see vulnerability as a sign of weakness. It's not. It's actually probably the greatest sign of courage because it's so difficult to do and it puts yourself at emotional risk. But it's extremely important if you want to build relationships. I have an image here of Lord Hanuman and Lord Rama, and my favorite story is when Lord Hanuman presents himself to Lord Rama for the very first time when he meets him. And he goes to see if Lord Rama is an assassin, and at Sugriva's command. And he's dressed as a sadhu. And when he realizes that this is Lord Rama, this is the moment he's been waiting for his entire life. He's been waiting for the Lord to come in his human form, to come and meet with him. Lord Rama initially doesn't recognize him, and Lord Hanuman feels very distressed in that moment. But then Lord Rama says to Lord Hanuman, "Come as you are." Essentially, he was saying to him is to remove your disguises, to remove your false identity, and show up to me exactly as you are. Be vulnerable, and I will accept you. So that I would say is probably the biggest takeaway message I would want everyone to have from this, is to be vulnerable, show up in the world exactly as you are. Now we are going to break up into discussion groups. Nina is going to post on the chat what is the UCLA loneliness assessment. And I would like, if everybody has the opportunity right now, to please take this assessment. It'll only take you 2 to 3 minutes, and it's the standard assessment that most researchers use when they're assessing loneliness. In your discussion groups, I want you to discuss, did your score surprise you? Why or why not? You don't have to reveal your score if you're not comfortable, but if you can, just discuss why your score surprised you. The scale indicates that if you score a 50 or higher, that is an indication that you may be struggling with loneliness and that maybe you need to take some steps to address it. If you're lower than 50, then maybe loneliness is not so much of a problem. But again, the assessment's not foolproof. The second question I want you to discuss is what gets in the way of you authentically showing up as you in the world? And the last thing is, how can we be more comfortable being alone, both physically and mentally?
Gratitude to our team for being so organized technically and philosophically, and gratitude to Madhav for sharing such awesome insights that are very practical. I mentioned in the chat that I'm going to use many of them and feel like I came up with them myself. So gratitude for helping me prepare my discourses, Madhav. And everyone stay on. I know you have lots of questions and Madhav has lots of answers. We're completing our workshop formally out of respect for those who have to go to sleep and have other responsibilities. If you do have questions, if you do have the time, then do stay on. Shanti, Shanti, Shantihi. Be safe, be sound, be serene, be happiness. I'll start, Madhav.
Yeah, sure.
Can you give us some insight into what is the earliest age that one tends to start to experience loneliness? And you may not have the exact number, but in your observation, is it in high school? Is it in elementary school?
I think the answer to that question would be going back to this idea that loneliness is about self-belonging. As soon as an individual is given that message that they don't belong, whether it is an early life trauma, whether it be a household who, doesn't support their, independence, as soon as an individual starts to internalize that message that they're not accepted and that they don't belong, it can start as early as that. I would say that it could start as early as 3, 4, 5 years old. Obviously, that individual might not be able to verbalize it at such a young age or really know what's going on, but they probably are likely to experience the symptoms of it that we talked about earlier, that fight or flight, that fear. So, thank you.
Okay, Mukul.
Thank you, Madhav. That was a wonderful talk, and I really like the discussion style. My question is, I have some elderly family members who tend to be more social, and I don't know exactly how to engage them in these ideas of loneliness because I feel like they go through it. But again, in the Indian culture, trying to tell elderly people about you are going through loneliness and bringing them into this type of mindset and trying to get them out of it is difficult. Do you have any topics or tips on how to engage them?
Yeah, the working with the elderly population they're actually probably the biggest concern when it comes to this topic of loneliness. Like in the UK, they've even started a ministry of loneliness to address this. And in Canada as well, I'm sure there are other things that are going on in the United States as well, where they're forming actual government organizations to address this, because it's a major burden on the population and on the people. And a lot of that comes from, as our parents get older, they're going to start losing people that are important to them too, right? That's a big piece of it. They're going to start losing community. And they might not realize that this is exactly what's happening to them. So I think ultimately it's a difficult topic to bridge, but going back to having that vulnerable conversation with your parents, with our parents, about what you feel is going on with them. And I think that all vulnerable conversations, if you feel like someone is experiencing something like loneliness or anxiety or depressed mood or whatever it is, I think the best way to bridge that topic is always by being vulnerable yourself first, by talking about, even with the mentor and mentees thing, if you feel like your mentee is experiencing something, talk about your experience first. Talk about how you've experienced feelings of loneliness and when you've experienced feelings of loneliness. Really make the environment comfortable to have those conversations with the individual by first starting with yourself. Is that helpful, Mukul? I think you're muted. So.
Thanks. Yes.
Okay, cool. Who is next?
Hari Om, Madhavji. Thank you for the amazing talk.
Sure.
Great to hear. Question is there any correlation or causality by research established between the lifestyle of consumerism, excessive consumerism, and loneliness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So some of the research shows that as we have become more and more private individuals, as we have learned to seclude ourselves more and more, we now have more people living in their own individual apartments by themselves than ever before in history. We very much can do our grocery shopping without any interaction with anyone. We can pretty much do anything in our society right now without having interaction with people. So some of the studies have looked at this and to see whether it is a cause of loneliness or not. I would say that a lot of it is, from what I've seen, and Vivek Murthy talks about this, is somewhat inconclusive, because they don't have good research on how it was in the past versus how it is now. Like I said, a lot of the research on loneliness has been more of a recent phenomenon. But I think that there is pretty obvious reason to be concerned about our consumerist culture and how that works, and how it's much more easy to be in isolation and be more self-focused and rather than community focused, right? What we're seeing right now is that a lot of our communities, I mean, mandirs, churches, all faith organizations are folding at a rate that's never been seen in history. Like, community is being lost. And Vivek Murthy talks about this. And with the loss of community is obviously going to be, you're going to see an increase in loneliness. So there is certainly evidence to show that that is likely happening, but it's not definitive evidence. But I can certainly say that I think that that's probably what is happening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, this is not really a question, but it's one thing this is one thing I really wanted to add in. So for loneliness, one question for you. Do you look at loneliness as more of a positive thing or a negative thing? Because before this class, actually, interesting fact, before this class, I used to look at loneliness as a negative concept or a negative thing, because people associate loneliness as with like isolation and depression. And the main reason why I think this loneliness and feeling and being alone was brought up was because like of the pandemic and how everyone is away from each other. So do you personally believe that loneliness is more of a positive thing or a negative thing? Because I believe like it varies heavily on opinions, and there is no definite answer for that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think very much there has been a stigma associated with loneliness. And a stigma essentially just means that people are uncomfortable talking about it. People don't like admitting to being lonely. People don't like just talking about the subject in general. So there is a stigma surrounding it. So I think generally it probably has a little bit of a negative aura around it. However, the idea that we're talking about loneliness right now is a very hopeful thing, because what it shows us is that the power of human connection to each other, to our community, to God, to ourselves, that is a very healing thing that is available. And again, I'm taking so much of what I talk about from Brené Brown, Vivek Murthy, and Vivek Murthy talks about that loneliness is a hopeful thing because it's showing us how important connection is to our healing, because we're doing that research now. So I think it really depends on the eyes of the beholder, but I think in general, we do know that there is a stigma around loneliness and people don't like talking about it. People don't like admitting to it. But I think it's also a hopeful topic.
Like what I was saying, with coming back to what I was saying, like loneliness especially isn't really, I would feel like to many people it is a bad thing. It can be a bad thing, but for many people, especially lots of introverts, they kind of like loneliness. Like, what if they don't like to interact with other people? So in that way, it's very happy. In that way, they kind of like that way of living too, because also what very much interested me, it was at the beginning of the class when there was a poll conducted. Oh, interesting fact, I brought up solitude earlier with my group. So it's like, is it loneliness or solitude? Because like I said, like we look at solitude as a happy or positive concept because we associate solitude with peace and with like peace and harmony. Whereas like we look at loneliness with like isolation and depression. But what surprised me the most is that in the beginning of the class, when we did the polls, the first two people, one of them was the popular kid and the captain of the soccer team, and the other one was like the very famous doctor. They were the ones who looked like the most lonely.
Yeah, they're rated.
Because I remember seeing the poll results, like they were the ones who were the most lonely, even though they're very. Because I think like it shows that you can still like feel isolated or lonely even if you have so many connections with the outside world.
Yeah,
I thought that was very interesting.
Absolutely. And I'm going to Vanna White and order up the questions. Thank you, Sharath. We have
Thank you, Sharath.
Vivekji
Really appreciate it.
Vivekji and Sheila Vivi. We have Binduji. We have Mahati. And then we have Shampuji. Cool.
Hi, Madhav. Awesome presentation. I wanted to know if you had any advice for parents or educators on how to sort of inculcate at an early age thoughts on, or not even thoughts, but how to encourage this idea of maybe confidence and security at an early age. So loneliness, and I'm using loneliness in a negative way, where not solitude, not being alone, but loneliness rather, is not felt at an early age. So advice on how to, I guess, train.
So I guess a couple of things that come to mind is, number one is having those vulnerable conversations about emotions with kids at a very early age, where you're talking openly about what emotion are you feeling right now, and have a conversation about why are you feeling that emotion? What emotion does that emotion trigger? So talking about emotions and learning to have those vulnerable conversations with kids at an early age, I think can be really important and go a long way, because then they'll learn to do it in the long run. The second thing that comes to mind is I was listening to a Brené Brown interview today where she interviewed Joe Biden, and he talks about how his parents at a very, very early age told him that no one is more valuable than Joe Biden. But he also said that Joe Biden is also no more valuable than anyone else. So just really instilling the values of letting them know how valuable and how important their voice is at an early age, and that nothing can take away their value, no matter what happens, no matter what someone says to them, no matter how someone treats them, that they have an inherent value that cannot be taken away. Cool. I think we have Bindu next, or I don't know who we have next. Nina?
Yes, Binduji.
Bindu?
I'll go. Yeah, thank you so much. That was great for advice to kids as well, like what parents can do to kids. Sometimes we tend to want kids to listen to us, and then say you're gonna get this if you don't do this. I'm not gonna do this for you. That sort of thing. And I don't know if that leads to uh, lack of self-acceptance, because they want to do something and then you tell them, I don't think you should be doing this, and they don't listen, and then so you end up saying, I'm going to take away these perks from you if you don't do it. So that's part of it. The other question I actually had was increasing the sense of belongingness. As I understand, it looks like it's all up here in your mind, the sense of belongingness. It doesn't matter where you are, which part of the world you are in, or what you could be doing, but ultimately everyone is a human being and the people you interact with. So what are some tips or things that we can think about if we're not feeling the sense of belongingness in a crowd or in a group, that we can increase that sense so we can have more meaningful conversations and relationships?
So I think it comes down to it's slipping from my mind, but I think it comes down to learning to be, going back to this idea of showing up to the world exactly as you are, and learning to be completely vulnerable. And I think first how that starts is you start with the people that are close to you, right? Be completely vulnerable, open. The people that are close to you, your parents, your brother, your sister, make sure that they know you for exactly who you are, and don't try to um, put on multiple identities with them. And then you slowly want to be able to build that into society. And part of this is just trial and error. I think a lot of times we're looking for quick tips on how can I feel more a sense of belonging in society. How really what it is it's a trial and error. It's a practice of being vulnerable. It's a practice of being open. It's a practice of being yourself. There are going to be times where you do it and you might get rejected, right? But it's that practice of doing it over and over and over again. And Brené Brown calls this braving the wilderness, right? Is stepping out into the wilderness, stepping out into the unknown, presenting yourself for exactly who you are. And sometimes it's not going to go as well as you want it to, but that's not what matters. What matters is that you took the courage to do it, and that you continue to take the courage. You continue to practice the courage of showing up as who you are. And sometimes it's going to feel ingenuine, but it's really just a practice, a trial and error. I think we got Mahati.
Madhavji, thank you so much for your talk. My question, I'm a current freshman in high school right now, and my question was about why I feel lonely sometimes when I don't meet up to other people's expectations for me, it just in general. Thank you.
So why you feel lonely when you don't meet others' expectations? Is that correct? Okay, so yeah, so sometimes it goes back to the sense of belonging and showing up exactly as you are. Sometimes we're looking for fitting in, right? So we present ourselves to others because we're looking for approval, because we're looking for some form of being accepted by them. And we all do this. I do it all the time, and it's something that I really struggle with. So learning to approach relationships with the intention of connecting with people rather than approaching relationships with the intention of getting people's approval and acceptance is a big thing. So a lot of it's about intention, is how when you are approaching relationships, when you are meeting with people, is asking yourself, am I interacting with this individual because I want their acceptance? Am I looking for their acceptance? Am I looking to fit in with this person? Am I looking for their approval? Or am I looking to just connect with them? Am I looking to get to know them? And am I looking to present my actual self? So I'm seeing also in the chat that someone has posted an exercise. Oh, anyways, okay, I can't see that. I hope that was helpful, Mahati. Okay. Ganapatiji.
Hari Om. Great program, Madhavji. Thank you for putting this together and wonderful slides. My question is the test, the small exercise we took. What does the high score mean, and what would one can do to bring their score down?
So, in interpreting this, the UCLA scale or assessment, what they say is that if you're over 50, not if you're over 50 in age, but if you're over 50 on the assessment, then you have scored in the, you're leaning towards loneliness. If you're under 50, loneliness isn't a problem. If you're over 50, it's a problem. And obviously, the closer you get to 100, the more maybe it's a problem, right? And a few things that you would want to do to combat that is, I'll go back to that continuum that I showed everyone earlier, but it's really about developing connection, looking for opportunities to connect with community, looking for opportunities to connect with the people around you. And again, we're talking about quality connections over quantity of connections. If you go and you decide to join 3 or 4 different groups tonight after this chat because you think it'll make you feel lonely, that's not a sustainable strategy or a helpful strategy. What you'd want to do is you'd want to invest yourself into one community and really try to develop a connection with that community, or choose a friend that you get along with and you feel comfortable with and you trust, and continue to deepen that trusting relationship. Like I talked about with that, you're digging a well, right? If you've only dug that well 20 feet, you maybe feel like you're close to the water, but you haven't really reached there. You can keep going lower and lower, and you might find more and more water the more you dig. So look for opportunities to connect more with people, look for opportunities to connect with community. I think nature is really important. I think that's been one of the benefits of COVID, is that more and more people are spending time in nature and are connecting with nature. So I think that that's a really great opportunity as well. So, and then obviously developing your connection with yourself and with God is equally important. I think that's it. I don't know if I haven't been monitoring the chat. Oh, we have Shruti. Okay.
Thank you. So one of my questions is, I think past couple months or years, I've been more vulnerable to others, and I feel like I've been burnt in the past, and feel like that trust in like opening myself up and being more authentic it's been a struggle. And I guess, what are the quick tips and suggestions on how to be more open and how to not let the past dictate to you? And
totally understand what you're saying. And I think I've experienced the same thing. And I think many people have experienced the same thing. The simple answer would be is to focus on the process rather than the results, right? So the process is the act of being courageous, right? And being vulnerable, being open, trying to open up with people and develop that connection is a very courageous thing to do. And continuing to sit in that process of being courageous is really important, and recognizing that every time you take that act, you've engaged in an act of courage. Rather than focusing on this is what ended up happening, this was the result, because we don't have control over our results. And our scriptures, obviously very much emphasize that. Our focus should be on our actions and the value and the intent behind our actions. And honestly, being vulnerable, showing up to the world as you are, is the most courageous thing you can do. So really, really recognize that every time you do that, and just know that you want to be a courageous person, right? I think we all want to be that, and knowing that every time we take that act, and that's kind of the definition of courage, right? Courage is very much an act that we don't know whether it's going to work out favorably. In fact, it's a risk, right? It's an emotional risk. If we're constantly doing things that are safe, then we're not being courageous. We're not taking risks. So recognizing that I want to be courageous, and then I'm going to continue to take courageous acts. So it's a reframing, a shift.
Yeah. We know that Madhav could probably be here all day and continue talking, but with that, we're going to give him a break. We're going to give us a break. Thank you, Madhav, for a delightful session. We'll see you soon. I'm just going to do Om once and we'll culminate. Okay? Om. Hari Om, everyone. Be well.